The day I arrived at my ranger posting in Yellowstone, my supervisor handed me a sheet of paper before she handed me my keys. Not the safety manual, not the operational guidelines, not the emergency contact sheet. A single piece of paper, folded once, printed on one side with 7 items on it. She watched me take it and said, "Read those before you go out on your first solo shift, not after." Before, then she handed me the keys and walked back to her office, and that was the extent of my orientation on the subject. My name is Patrick Rowe, and I was 27 years old when I took the ranger posting at Yellowstone, coming off 2 years of seasonal work in state parks in the Pacific Northwest, where the strangest thing I had ever encountered on the job was a black bear that had developed a taste for a particular brand of granola bar and kept breaking into the same campsite to find it. I thought I understood outdoor work. I thought I understood wild places. I thought Yellowstone would be a bigger version of what I already knew. It is not a bigger version of what you already know. It is a different thing entirely. The scale of it is part of it, yes, but the scale is not the point. The point is that Yellowstone sits on top of something that most parks do not sit on top of, and that something makes itself known in ways that the official visitor materials do not cover, and that the ranger training program addresses only partially, and that the sheet of paper my supervisor handed me on my first day addressed in the only language that actually works for it, which is direct instruct. Tian without extensive explanation. The paper had 7 rules. Rule 1. The thermal pools are to be observed and never touched, which every ranger knows, but this rule had a second part that the standard guidelines did not. It said if a thermal pool you have observed before shows a change in color, do not approach closer than 15 feet. Log it, photograph it from distance, and report it before the end of your shift, not at the end of your week. Rule 2. If you encounter a visitor who claims to have seen another ranger in a section of the park where no ranger was scheduled, take a description and log it. Do not tell the visitor there was no ranger there. Do not confirm there was. Rule 3. The old ranger station at the northeastern boundary is structurally sound but is not used for operational purposes. Do not shelter there during weather events. Do not enter it for any reason. If a visitor asks about it, tell them it is a historical structure under preservation assessment. Rule 4. Bison in the Hayden Valley will sometimes stand in formation facing the same direction for extended periods. This is normal. Do not approach, do not attempt to disperse them, and do not report it unless the formation persists for more than 4 hours without movement. Rule 5. If your radio produces a voice giving instructions that do not match current operational protocol, do not follow those instructions. Log the time and content and continue with your standard duties. Rule 6. At the Norris Geyser Basin, the northeast corner boardwalk sometimes shows footprints in conditions where footprints should not be present, specifically on surfaces that were dry and empty at your last pass. Log the time and location. Do not follow the direction the footprints indicate. Rule 7. If you are ever alone in the park interior after dark for any operational reason, and you hear what sounds like a second set of footsteps matching your pace, stop walking. If the sound continues after you stop, do not turn around. Stand still until the sound stops and then return to your vehicle by the most direct route. I stood in the parking lot of the ranger station and read those 7 rules twice. Then I folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket and drove out to start my first shift. The first 3 months were ordinary. I learned the park the way you learn any new territory, by covering it repeatedly until the geography became instinct. I learned which trails flooded first after rain, which thermal areas ran hot enough that the ground around them was dangerous even away from the obvious pools, which parts of the road bison preferred in the early morning. I logged my observations and filed my reports and had the gradual experience of understanding settling in over the top of information. The first rule I had to apply was Rule 4, the bison formation rule. It was September, my second month, a Tuesday morning. I was doing a vehicle patrol through the Hayden Valley when I came around a curve and found approximately 40 bison standing in the valley in a rough arc formation, all of them facing northwest, none of them moving, not grazing, not shifting. Standing with an absolute stillness that was different from the ordinary stillness of bison at rest. I stopped the truck and watched them. They did not move for 20 minutes. I checked my watch and noted the time and settled in to wait, the rule clear in my head. Do not approach, do not disperse, do not report unless it persists for more than 4 hours. It persisted for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Then all at once, every animal in the formation began moving simultaneously, dispersing into normal grazing behavior as though a signal had been given that I had not heard. I logged the time, the duration, the rough number of animals, and the direction they had been facing. Then I drove on and finished my patrol. That evening I looked through the patrol logs going back 2 years, specifically searching for entries about bison formations in the Hayden Valley. I found 14 of them. different dates, different seasons, different durations ranging from 40 minutes to 3.5 hours, all of them facing the same direction. Northwest toward the same section of the valley edge, where the ground rose slightly toward a ridge line before dropping out of sight. I drove out to that ridge line on my next day off and stood at the top of it looking down at the valley below. The ground on the far side of the ridge dropped into a small basin I had not known was there. Thermal ground, steam rising from several vents, the characteristic pale earth of mineral deposits around active features. A pool at the center, maybe 20 feet across, very still, a deep blue-green color that shifted as I watched it in the wind-changed light. No trail led to the basin. It was not on my patrol maps. I stood on the ridge and looked at it for a long time, and then I went back to my truck and drove to the ranger station and found my supervisor. I described what I had found and where it was. She listened without expression, and when I finished she asked me one question. "Did you go down into the basin?" I said no. She nodded once. She said, "Good." She made a note on something on her desk that I could not read from where I was standing. Then she said the basin was a known feature that was monitored through a separate reporting channel, and that my job in relation to it was exactly what I had done: observe from the ridge if I happened to be there and not approach. I asked her if the bison formations were connected to the basin. She looked at me for a moment, then she said, "Everything in this park is connected to everything else. That is the nature of the system." She said it the way you say something that is true but is also in a specific context, a way of not answering the question that was actually asked. I went back to my desk and logged the basin location in my personal patrol notes and did not bring it up again. Rule 2 came up in my 4th month in a way I had not expected. A family of 4 stopped me on the road near the Midway Geyser Basin, a father and mother and 2 kids around 10 years old, and the father told me they had seen another ranger on the boardwalk about 20 minutes earlier who had told them to move along because the area was closing for a survey. The area was not closing for a survey. I had come from that direction and there was no survey scheduled and no other ranger had been assigned to that section that morning. I knew the duty roster. I remembered Rule 2, take a description, do not confirm or deny. I asked the father to describe the ranger he had seen. He said, standard uniform, about my height, older, maybe late 50s, gray at the temples. He said the ranger had been very polite but had been firm about moving them along. I thanked him and asked him to enjoy the rest of their visit and moved on. That evening, I checked the personnel records for rangers who had worked the Midway section historically. Retired staff, transferred staff, anyone who might conceivably have been in the park that day for any reason. The description the father had given me matched a ranger named Desmond who had worked the Midway section for 11 years before dying of a heart attack in the park in 1987, in the very section where the family had seen him. I sat with that information for a long time. I logged the visitor report the way the rule instructed. Description of the reported ranger, time, location, what the visitor said the ranger told them. I filed it with my end-of-shift report under the notation visitor reported unscheduled ranger contact, description taken, no further action per protocol. I do not know what the family actually saw. I am not going to tell you I know what they saw. What I am going to tell you is that Rule 2 exists and that it has been used enough times that someone thought it necessary to include it on a list of 7 operating rules handed to every ranger on their first day, and that the specificity of the instruction, take a description, do not confirm, do not deny, suggests that the people who wrote it had a clear understanding of what was being reported. And had thought carefully about the right response. Rule 6, the footprints on the Norris Boardwalk, happened twice in my first year. Both times were in the early morning, the first patrol of the day, before any visitors had been admitted to the basin area. Both times the boardwalk surface in the northeast corner showed a clear trail of wet footprints on dry wood, heading in a specific direction, stopping abruptly without reaching any feature that would account for them. Both times I logged the location and the time. Both times I did not follow the direction the footprints indicated. I want to be honest about that second part, because not following them required something from me that I had not expected to need on a job that I had understood, when I took it, as primarily a job about wildlife and terrain and visitor safety. It required the willingness to stand in front of something genuinely unexplained and make the active choice to leave it unexplained rather than satisfy a curiosity that the rules had specifically told me not to satisfy. That is harder than it sounds. The footprints stopped in the middle of the boardwalk both times, pointing in a direction where nothing visible warranted the attention. And the absence of explanation was itself a kind of pull, the same pull that makes you look over a ledge you have been warned away from, not because you want to fall, just because the warning implies there is something down there worth seeing. I did not follow the footprints. I logged the time and location and continued my patrol and tried to think of it as a data point rather than a mystery, which is not the same thing but is a useful approximation when you need to get through the rest of your shift. Rule 7 I only needed once in my 7th month, and once was enough. It was a November evening, the park largely empty of visitors, the light going fast by 4 o'clock. I had stayed late to address a maintenance issue on one of the trail markers in the interior, and I was walking back to my truck along a service path through the forest when I became aware, gradually and then all at once, that the sound of my footsteps had a shadow, not an echo. Echoes are a feature of the environment, walls, hills, hard surfaces reflecting sound back at a delay. This was with me, matching my pace, my rhythm, the particular pattern of my stride on that specific ground. A second set of footsteps that had not been there a minute before and that I could not place to any source in front of me or beside me. I stopped walking. The footsteps continued for 2 steps after I stopped, then they stopped. I stood completely still in the service path with the cold November dark coming down around me, and I thought about Rule 7 with a clarity that I had never applied to any rule in my life, the way you think about a very specific piece of information when it suddenly becomes the most relevant information you possess. Do not turn around, stand still until the sound stops. Return to your vehicle by the most direct route. I stood still. The forest was quiet behind me. 5 seconds, 10, 30, nothing. I walked to my truck by the most direct route, which took 4 minutes, and I did not look behind me once during those 4 minutes, not because I was not afraid, I was afraid, but because the rule was clear and the rule had been written by someone who knew what happened when you did not follow it, and I trusted that knowledge more than I trusted my own instinct to turn and look. I reached my truck, I got in, I drove to the station. I logged the time and location under the notation unusual auditory observation, service path, northeastern interior per Rule 7 protocol. My supervisor read it the next morning and came to find me. She asked the same question she had asked about the basin. Did I follow the rule? I said yes. She nodded. She said, good. She looked at me for a moment with the expression I had come to recognize as the expression she used when she was deciding whether to say something more. This time she said something more. She said, I have been running this district for 14 years. In 14 years, I have had 11 rangers report that experience on that path or paths like it. All 11 of them followed the rule. She paused. I have records going back further than my tenure. There have been rangers who did not follow that rule. I asked her what happened to them. She said they finished their shifts. They were physically fine. But she said the word fine with a particular weight that suggested fine was doing more work in that sentence than it usually did. She said they stopped being able to work the interior alone after that. Some transferred out, some left the service. Whatever they saw when they turned around was not something they could set down easily. She did not tell me what they saw. I did not ask. I had decided somewhere around the 4th minute of that walk to my truck that there were things about this park that I was better equipped to work alongside if I did not have specific images to attach to them, and that the rules were designed, among other things, to protect me from exactly those images. I am in my 3rd year at Yellowstone now. I have not broken any of the 7 rules. I have applied all of them at least once and some of them many times, and they have worked exactly as they were designed to work, which is to say that I have completed every shift and logged every observation and driven home at the end of every day intact and functional and capable of coming back the next morning. My supervisor is retiring at the end of this year. She asked me last month if I planned to stay on. I said yes. She said good. She said she would leave me the full archive of historical rule applications going back to the 1970s, which she had been maintaining as a personal project for 14 years, and that I should read it when I had time, all of it, not just the summaries. I told her I would. She said there was one more thing she wanted me to know before she left, something that was not in any official document and that she had carried for 14 years without writing it down because some things, she said, need to be passed from person to person rather than put on paper where the context gets lost. I asked her what it was. She said, the rules protect you. But they only protect you if you trust them completely. Partial trust is not enough out there. You cannot follow 6 rules and decide the 7th does not apply to your situation. The park does not make exceptions for people who think they understand it well enough to know better. She looked at me steadily. She said, nobody understands it well enough to know better, not me. Not the rangers who wrote those rules, not the geologists or the biologists or anyone else who has spent a career here. We understand pieces of it. The rules are built from those pieces. She said, follow all 7, every time. And when something happens that is not covered by the 7, use the same principle the rules are built on, which is that this place is older and larger and more complicated than you are, and that the correct response to that fact is consistent, careful respect. Then she stood up and said she had reports to file, and that was the end of the conversation. I went back to my desk and sat there for a while thinking about the 7 rules in the archive and the 14 years she had spent carefully recording the experiences of rangers who had worked this territory and come out the other side of it. Then I picked up my keys and drove out to start my patrol. The park was quiet that morning. The thermal areas steamed in the cold air. A small group of bison moved slowly through the Hayden Valley, unhurried, grazing, the ordinary business of large animals in a large landscape. The park, conducted its business the way it always did, indifferent to my schedule, indifferent to my understanding of it, old and vast and entirely occupied with whatever it was occupied with, which was not me and had never been me. I was just the person driving the road through the middle of it, following the rules, grateful every shift that someone had taken the trouble to write them down.